Few aircraft in World War II left as deep a psychological imprint as the Junkers Ju-87, widely known as the Stuka. Its wailing siren, its unique inverted gull wings, and its uncanny precision in dive bombing made it a formidable weapon, and also a colossal target once enemy fighters gained the upper hand. Today we'll explore its design roots, its operational highs and lows, and the stories of those who entrusted their fate to a machine whose success rested on achieving total air superiority. This is the chronicle of how one plane could be both indispensable at the outset and tragically outmoded as the war raged on. Early development and philosophy. The philosophy behind the Ju-87 emerged from interwar thinking in Germany about the value of precision bombing. Engineer Hermann Pohlmann believed that a dive bomber had to be structurally tough and user-friendly for average pilots. This led to discarding complex retractable landing gear in favor of the Ju-87's fixed, spatted gear. Though aesthetically peculiar, it offered greater durability and easier maintenance. In the early 1930s, Germany was still in the shadows of the Versailles Treaty, limiting the size and scope of its air force. But with the rise of the Nazi regime, clandestine development gained momentum. A prototype designated Ju-A-48 was tested in 1928 with promising results, prompting the Reich's aviation ministry to push forward with an upgraded version for potential military use. Famous pilot Ernst Udet, fascinated by American dive bombers like the Curtiss F-11C Goshawk, championed the concept for the Luftwaffe. He believed this style of attack allowed unprecedented accuracy, particularly in striking moving or fortified targets. Overcoming skepticism from some within the Air Ministry, the design team secured the resources needed to refine the new bomber. By 1935, the Ju-87 had taken to the air, ushering in a specialized category of lethal precision bombers. Technical innovations and design features. Central to the Ju-87's deadly reputation was its ability to dive nearly vertical onto a target. This demanded a rugged airframe capable of enduring high G-forces when pulling out of dives. Junkers introduced automatic pull-up dive brakes located under each wing, ensuring a safer escape from steep descents, even if a pilot temporarily blacked out from the gravitational forces. One of the plane's defining features was its inverted gull wings, which had both an aerodynamic and practical purpose. They gave the pilot better visibility over the nose and also shortened the landing gear struts. Combined with large, trouser-like fairings around the main wheels, the Stuka's silhouette became instantly recognizable wherever it appeared. Though the airframe was primarily metal, engineers selected specialized alloys for stressed parts. Pantol, a titanium aluminum compound, stiffened wing flaps, while high-stress bolts were steel. Modular sections facilitated quick repairs in frontline conditions, as wings and fuselage segments could be unbolted and replaced with relative ease. Stuka crews were typically two, a pilot and a rear gunner who doubled as a radio operator. Up front, the pilot aimed twin forward-firing machine guns, while a flexible machine gun in back defended against attacking aircraft. A signature feature was the Jericho trumpet, a small propeller-driven siren attached to the landing gear that screamed through the air as the bomber dived, boosting its psychological impact. Diving procedure, the essence of a Stuka attack. Among all World War II aircraft, the Ju-87's dive bombing method stood out for its near-vertical approach. Usually flying at around 15,000 feet, the pilot would spot the target through a bomb sight window in the cockpit floor. Pulling a lever engaged dive brakes, limiting airspeed to around 350 miles per hour, or a bit more, despite the steep angle. As the plane nosed over, a red indicator popped up on the wing to confirm the automatic pull-out mechanism was ready. Upon reaching the release altitude, often just a few hundred feet above the ground, the pilot dropped the bomb. The aircraft's automated system then initiated a swift upward climb, helping avoid collision with terrain. Pilots often experienced intense G-forces, enough to blur vision, before leveling out to rejoin the formation or head home. Early combat debuted in the Spanish Civil War. While Germany was still publicly denying offensive intentions, it secretly tested the Ju-87 in the Spanish Civil War. The Condor Legion deployed a handful of pre-production Stukas to support nationalist forces. Their pinpoint strikes on Republican positions proved that the concept was battlefield-ready. Although only small numbers were used, this trial run provided valuable lessons in tactics and survivability. The combination of dive-bombing shock effect and the weapon's accuracy established the Ju-87 as a favored tool of blitzkrieg strategy. Commanders realized that if they had air superiority and close coordination with ground forces, the Stuka could break enemy lines quickly. But it also had vulnerabilities. Opposition from fighter aircraft was light in Spain, so the Stuka's defensive weaknesses remained unexposed. Unleashing blitzkrieg. Poland, 1939. When Germany invaded Poland in the fall of 1939, the Ju-87 soared as the spearhead of the Luftwaffe's aerial arm. On the campaign's very first morning, a trio of Stukas bombed vital bridges over the Vistula to prevent their demolition, marking one of the earliest actions of World War II in Europe. Polish forces, lacking sufficient modern fighter planes and anti-aircraft artillery, suffered heavily under the Stuka's relentless attacks. Every time Polish units tried to form defensive pockets or counterattacks, Ju-87s hammered them with bombs that left roads clogged and morale shattered. Although the plane itself was slow and an easy mark if caught by fighters, the Luftwaffe's robust escort system mostly kept the skies open for the Stuka. By the end of the campaign, the aircraft had cemented its reputation for devastating close support. Scandinavia, Operation Weserübung. With minimal time to rest, the Stuka was sent north in April 1940 for Operation Weserübung, targeting Denmark and Norway. Denmark capitulated almost immediately, but Norway was a harder nut to crack. The mountainous terrain limited panzer operations, leaving the Luftwaffe to deliver a sharper aerial edge. Coastal towns and Norwegian fortifications crumbled under Stuka bombardment. German warships, though, discovered that well-placed Norwegian shore batteries inflicted surprising damage. Consequently, Stukas were summoned to silence strategic gun positions. Allied warships sent to counter the invasion soon felt the Stuka's sting, with multiple cruisers and destroyers hit or sunk. This success reinforced the plane's anti-shipping credentials, but also showed that repeated exposure to enemy fire could be costly. Western triumphs. France and the Low Countries. May 1940 witnessed the Stuka at its lethal peak as Germany attacked the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Here, the Luftwaffe practiced close air support in tandem with mechanized ground assaults, the hallmark of blitzkrieg. Stuka formations targeted enemy rail lines, artillery clusters, and troop columns, creating chaos among Allied defenders. During the race to the English Channel, Ju-87s knocked out entire convoys, hammered airfields, and helped isolate strategic pockets. Low-level attacks on retreating Allied columns produced immense disruption, and the psychological effect, amplified by the sirens, cannot be underestimated. People fled in terror at the distinctive howl, often calling it the screaming banshee of the battlefield. Even as French and British fighter pilots sometimes intercepted Stukas, German fighter cover generally kept losses contained until the final pushes at Dunkirk. The Battle of Britain, a deadly reckoning. Fresh from triumph, the Ju-87 next faced Britain's Royal Air Force. Initially, the Stuka achieved notable successes against shipping convoys in the English Channel, sinking or badly damaging destroyers and merchant vessels. But as air battles shifted inland, the tide turned fast. Faster and more agile British fighters like the Spitfire and Hurricane had a field day once they caught Stukas at medium altitudes. The dive bombers, weighed down by bombs and lacking strong defensive armament, became easy targets. Heavy losses forced the Luftwaffe to withdraw the Ju-87 from major operations in Britain by mid to late 1940. Although it continued sporadic anti-shipping and night missions, the plane's near-invincible aura had evaporated. North Africa and the Mediterranean. In the desert sands of North Africa, the Ju-87 briefly regained some of its deadly edge. Alongside General Rommel's Afrika Korps, it targeted British supply lines, battered entrenched positions, and attempted to dominate the desert skies. The clear conditions of the North African theater favored dive-bombing tactics, and the Stuka's dive siren once again sowed panic among ground troops. Nevertheless, as the Allies mustered greater air power, Stuka formations came under heavy fighter attack. Fuel shortages and diminishing numbers of skilled pilots hurt the Ju-87's effectiveness. By 1942, the introduction of robust Allied fighters, including American types, meant the slow-moving Ju-87 was far more vulnerable. Still, the plane continued to fight in smaller numbers over Malta, Crete, and in support of Italian forces, leaving a record of extreme bravery among crews flying such an increasingly outdated machine. The Eastern Front. Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, was on a scale the world had never seen. Hundreds of Ju-87s joined the onslaught, forming a key part of the shock tactics that initially disrupted Soviet defenses. Soviet airfields were overrun or bombed out on the first day, giving the Luftwaffe near complete control of the skies. As in Poland, the Stuka excelled at smashing columns of armor or supply convoys, so long as enemy fighters stayed away. Over time, the Red Air Force regrouped, and Soviet aircraft production soared. By the battles for Moscow in the winter of 1941 and beyond, the Ju-87 faced increasing pockets of aerial opposition. Even so, in many breakthroughs, like the siege of Sevastopol or the push through the Crimea, the Stuka was indispensable. Precision attacks helped German ground forces seize critical strongholds, though heavy flak and a gradually modernizing Soviet fighter force imposed mounting losses. Turning tides, from Stalingrad to Kursk, one of the Ju-87's last big triumphs came in the brutal fighting around Stalingrad. In the autumn of 1942, desperate for any edge, the German 6th Army relied on Ju-87 assaults to hold off Soviet reinforcements. The bombers flew hundreds of daily sorties, targeting fortress-like buildings and staging areas on the west bank of the Volga. For a time, they inflicted dire losses on Soviet troops. But as the Soviets encircled Stalingrad, the plane's vulnerability only grew. Fuel shortages and battered airstrips made sustained operations harder. By 1943, the Red Air Force often matched or exceeded the Luftwaffe in local air superiority. At Kursk, massive tank battles raged below, and the Ju-87 turned more specialized. Pilots like Hans-Ulrich Rudel flew variants armed with underwing cannons to target Soviet armor. They scored many kills on paper, but Soviet records indicated actual tank destruction by air attack was often lower than claimed. In any case, the Ju-87 was proving inadequate against swarms of modern Soviet fighters. Late war variants, the Ju-87D and the Kanonenvogel. By 1943, new versions like the Ju-87D introduced heavier armor, bigger bombs, and improved engines. The Dora series got rid of the landing gear spats in many cases and refined the cockpit for better visibility. Yet performance gains were still marginal compared to contemporary Allied fighter bombers. Desperate for an effective anti-tank platform, engineers fitted the Ju-87 with twin 37mm cannons. Nicknamed the Kanonenvogel, or cannon bird, it occasionally wreaked havoc on Soviet armor columns, particularly when manned by gifted pilots. The huge recoil and the drag from these gun pods, however, crippled speed and maneuverability. If caught, the Ju-87 had little chance of escape. Night missions and final production. Under unrelenting Allied and Soviet pressure, many Ju-87 units transitioned into night harassment groups, performing low-level attacks under cover of darkness. Others were phased out entirely in favor of the more versatile Focke-Wulf 190 fighter bomber. Still, Stuka production limped on until 1944 due to a lack of better close support replacements. Factories struggled with labor shortages, bombing raids, and a crippling lack of raw materials. By 1945, the once ubiquitous Ju-87 was reduced to a handful of machines eking out ground attack sorties whenever skies were clear of enemy fighters. Some battered Stukas participated in the final German defenses around Berlin, targeting Soviet ground forces in a last stand that underscored their ongoing vulnerability. Legacy and survival estimates vary, but roughly 6,000 Ju-87s were produced between 1936 and 1944. By war's end, the slow-moving dive bomber had been almost entirely replaced by faster, more agile aircraft that blended ground attack and air combat roles. Yet the Ju-87's place in history remains unforgettable. Where it could operate without interference from enemy fighters, the Stuka delivered the perfect synergy of shock and precision, especially in the early Blitzkrieg campaigns. Its siren, ironically installed partly to help pilots judge speed, became a symbol of terror. Stories abound of it crippling Allied convoys, smashing bunkers, and even sinking ships off the coast of Norway. But once the Allies ruled the air, the Stuka quickly became a flying relic. Surviving examples are now prized museum artifacts. Two intact specimens, one in London's Araf Museum and one in the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, offer tangible links to a time when the shriek of the Ju-87 heralded the raw power of a new form of mechanized warfare. There are also partial wrecks in various museums across Europe, reminders of both the plane's wide deployment and its eventual destruction. Conclusion: a symbol of blitzkrieg and its limitations. Ultimately, the Ju-87's reputation swung between extremes. In the opening salvos of World War II, it was a terror from above, an embodiment of fast, coordinated warfare that took armies by surprise. But the plane's design, sturdy, slow, and reliant on uncontested skies, was unsustainable once Allied air power soared. As we reflect on its story, we see an illustration of how technology and tactics evolve, and how quickly the unstoppable can become obsolete. War never stands still. The Ju-87 soared to fame on the cutting edge of combined arms strategy, then fell behind as the conflict demanded greater speed and flexibility in the air. But for the men who flew and faced this machine, its roar, its shape, and its terrifying dive remain unforgettable echoes of a world at war.